Alright, this might be the hardest review I've ever had to do. While reading Deadtown at about the 40% mark, I reached out to the author KD Tackett and mentioned that my review was going to be very critical. I asked if he'd prefer me to DNF, that is, stop reading and move on, or finish the book and go ahead with the review. Brutal honesty and all. To his credit, he agreed that I should continue reading and release a review. So here we are. KD Tackett, the artist temporarily known as Robert Cross, is a supportive and active member of the indie author community. We've had several conversations, so I take no pleasure in what I'm about to do. No writing advice. Before I get into the critiques, credit where it's due. Deadtown has a super creative concept behind it. When someone dies in the city of Covenwood, they have the chance to randomly resurrect as either a vampire, what most people want, a ghoul, not preferable, but a resurrection's a resurrection, or a creeper, essentially a zombie, which most people don't want, that's not good. There's actually a nice twist around this concept that could have been a series defining reveal, but it's just sort of thrown out there like it's nothing. I'll get to that soon. As well as a compelling concept, KD has created an interesting cast of characters. There's so much potential here for the two undead affairs detectives. Dorian, he's a witch. Victor, he's a vampire. Dorian especially has an interesting past and some compelling present day struggles. See, the story has the ingredients of greatness. They've just been thrown in a blender and turned into chaos instead of being carefully prepared, making the overall meal a little tough to swallow. Yes, the word chaos appears on almost every page, it seems. Look, not that much, but enough for it to stick in my head. Deadtown also has an interesting magic system with a big focus on runes for witches. To gain certain abilities, they need to forge and bond a rune, essentially putting it on their skin permanently, which can be both painful and dangerous. In that sense, magic is earned. Vampire Victor has a different power set centered on shadow magic, mixing it up a bit. The magic system overall is another solid ingredient that gets tossed in the chaos blender. Overall, there are plenty of entertaining moments. Even the lore dump at the start is interesting enough to forgive. That's how you do it, people. If you're going to info dump, if you just can't help yourself, at least make it a fun dump. There are also complex layers of conflict and mystery presented at the start. Dorian's personal problems, their current case, the overall mystery behind Deadtown. Why are people coming back to life? That's not meant to happen. Overall, the mysteries, big and small, do build up nicely in several places. Like I said, the ingredients for greatness are there. But look, let's get into the critiques because one of my initial points of praise gets quickly overturned after the opening. Let's talk figurative language. So, after the author describes rain hitting the shoulders of Dorian's leather jacket as sounding like popcorn popping in a tin pot, I thought the figurative language in this book was going to be clear and grounded, which would have been a welcome relief. That comparison, popcorn popping, creates a strong image. It's a solid line because you can imagine that sound. It adds clarity to the scene. However, the prose quickly takes a wild turn and starts causing more chaos than clarity. I can sort of see what certain lines are trying to say, but they're often too abstract to be meaningful. For example, a decrepit building that wore its secrets like a second skin. It sounds meaningful, but I don't know what it means. Wearing secrets like a second skin? Generally, the phrase refers to something that fits well and is comfortable, so I guess the building wore its secrets well or wore them comfortably. I mean, you could twist it to make sense, sort of. I don't know. It's too abstract for my liking, and the second skin line is used several times throughout the narrative in different contexts. Sometimes it almost makes sense. In this case, it's a bit of a stretch. Another one, carvings so weathered they looked like cries from a bygone era. What the does that mean? Matching of visual item carvings with an auditory simile, bygone cries. Without the cries from a bygone era line, I would have just read that the carvings were weathered and moved on. Instead, I was sitting there scratching my thick noggin, trying to figure out how it makes sense. I never did figure it out, by the way. Alright, one more. Dorian exhaled slowly, the smoke from his cigarette curling around him like spectral evidence of past battles. What? Look, I know some people enjoy this type of language, but it's not my thing. I prefer figurative language that enhances clarity instead of causing chaos. Maybe I'm just simple. I mean, that could very well be it. Poetry was never my thing. Look, I can generally ignore the odd line, but in Deadtown, it's harder to ignore because often the figurative language morphs into walls of flowery exposition that's using a lot of words while saying nothing at all. It kills the mood and the momentum. So many times I was screaming in my head and a few times out loud. Just tell the story. Look, for this type of novel, some flowery language to spice up the prose can work, but overdoing it creates a flavor imbalance, especially when the figurative language is so indecipherable. It's like when I was first learning to cook and I tried to make spaghetti bolognese. The recipe said add 3 cloves of garlic. Being new to cooking terminology and the concept of garlic, apparently, I assumed what I now know is a bulb of garlic was a clove. So I enthusiastically minced up 3 entire bulbs of garlic and proceeded to ruin the meal. Now, I like garlic, but what I made was inedible. Culinary chaos. My point is, the overdose levels of abstract flowery prose in this novel and many others I've read, to be fair, is the literary equivalent of adding 3 bulbs of garlic to a small batch of spaghetti bolognese. Overall, you could probably cut half the words from the story and it would pace better, not to mention make more sense. There's so much fluff, and too often it's repeated info, the same line said over in slightly different ways. For example, several times within the narrative, characters seemingly can't stop repeating how bad a situation is, I assume to create a false sense of tension. On the same topic, they had this to say: we risk creating a future that's worse than our past. Every alteration comes with a cost that we might not be able to pay. Be ready to watch everything we know crumble into a cascade of unintended consequences. Just tell the story. At one point, it mentions 5 times in a short space that a certain character is going to play the victim. Why do these people keep repeating themselves? I kept thinking I'd accidentally skipped back a page. The funny thing is, come to think of it, I don't think that character did end up playing the victim, so their repetitive concern was for nothing. Chaos! There are also quite a few cliche lines, which isn't a major offense, but it's something to be mindful of when writing anything. For example, every setting in Deadtown seems determined to hold its breath. The room held its breath. The street held its breath. The city held its breath. The night held its breath. I generally give cliches a pass because, they're cliches for a reason. They often do work in the right context, but when the same cliche lines show up again and again and again and again, you probably can't tell, but the room's actually holding its breath right now. I'm less forgiving. One of my biggest issues with the story is how unnaturally and illogically characters act. I can't go too deep without dropping spoilers, but multiple characters either act randomly or abruptly, often against their own interests, like the twist about the vampires. I won't reveal it, but like I said, it could have been a series defining twist, but it's delivered early in the novel with the build up and enthusiasm of someone delivering a cold pizza to your doorstep. Then you open the box and it's not a pizza, it's just a simple mind-blowing revelation. Later, when Victor tells Dorian the secret, it's delivered in the same sudden way. No fuss, no build-up. Here, just have this mind-blowing, life-changing revelation. No biggie. The funny thing is, another character, Morgan, says, I'm a witch, and witches know the secret about vampires. What are you saying? Dorian's a witch and he had no idea. That's just one of many minor inconsistencies that might have reasonable explanations that aren't provided in the chaos of the text. To me, most of the characters in Deadtown feel like props rather than believable page people. Dorian feels the most real because you do see him battle with his thoughts and emotions at certain times, but most of the others feel like puppets to the plot. Their depth rarely comes through in their actions or words. While plenty of the dialogue does work, it gets a little cartoonish and nonsensical in places. For example, the eternal damnation of Deadtown remains balanced by chaos. Bit overdramatic, not to mention I have no fucking idea what that means. Look, maybe it is just me, but so much page time is wasted with overdramatic lines where, in my opinion, it would have been better spent building real tension instead of trying to convince us how tense the situation is. I just find it hard to enjoy stories where large chunks of the prose don't make immediate sense. I'm here for the story, for the characters. I don't want to be solving word riddles. Quite often, it feels like steps are missing from the story. Random stuff happens, people act randomly or seem to act unnaturally. It's like we arrive at a point somehow without actually taking the journey to get there. I'm trying not to spoil anything, but at one point, let's just say this. A character makes a big decision. Think Darth Vader turning on the Emperor, a character defining, movie defining moment. It's a big deal, or it should be. In Deadtown's case, this moment and many others fall flat due to the lack of genuine tension, internal conflict, and build up around them. Basically, the drama's lost. I will say the story does build up to a big climax and there is a WTF moment at the end, but it's a plot hole filled journey to get there. That brings me to my biggest critique, and it's something I mentioned to KD. There are more plot holes in Deadtown than there are potholes in my town. And anyone who has ever lived anywhere ever knows that's likely quite a lot of plot holes. Pure chaos. It's the missing steps again. One example, Victor hears footsteps upstairs above his lab, implying there's an intruder. Then he gets distracted by something and apparently forgets about the person upstairs because it's never mentioned again. That one's minor, but it's also relatively spoiler free. When I mention the plot holes to KD, he explains some of them, but with so much missing information in the text itself, the head scratching moments do stack up. The good news is, like potholes, plot holes can be filled. Just don't expect the council to do it. Plot holes aside, the overall plot doesn't feel cohesive. While everything is technically connected, it somehow feels disconnected. At the start, I thought I was reading a series of short stories. Maybe the short story format would work better because each job does feel disjointed from the main plot. Essentially, the plot is, I don't know, keep doing undead police work. There's no overarching goal, but there could have been. For example, Dorian's personal problem could have been the thread that ties everything together, and I kind of think it's meant to be. But right now, it's too much of a bulldog's breakfast plot wise when it could be a nice bowl of spaghetti bolognese with a sensible amount of garlic. I'll say it again. Deadtown, with such a solid concept behind it, has the ingredients for greatness. I'd love to see it re-edited, rewritten, republished, with the problems fixed and the plot holes filled. I know KD takes a full DIY approach, which I respect, but releasing a story into the wild without so much as a beta read is rarely a good idea. We all have blind spots when it comes to our own work. Right now, Deadtown feels more like Plot Hole City, but I'd love to see it refurbished, revitalized, using those winning ingredients well to create something great. The prose itself is neat, very few errors, so that's a big chunk of the editing battle already won, and once identified, the plot holes are easy enough to fill, the repeated, redundant and pointless lines are simple enough to cut. The tough part would be writing genuine build up and tension around the important moments instead of everything happening so abruptly. If you enjoyed this video, hit subscribe. If you didn't enjoy this video, hit subscribe anyway and hate watch my content. That's always fun.